The wind blew hard through the narrow street of the alien colony. It was late evening, and the sky was turning dark with storm clouds. Zellari stood quietly in the long line outside the colony market, holding her daughter close, her thin coat did little to protect them from the freezing air. Mina, her little daughter, stood beside her. Hugging her small arms to her chest, she was shivering. Her fingers turning light purple from the cold. She didn't cry. Not anymore. She had learned to stay silent when she was hungry or cold. That made Zellari's heart hurt even more. They had waited 2 hours in the line. And Zellari's feet had gone numb. Her stomach was empty, but she didn't care about herself. All she could think about was Mina. She looked down at the child, brushing a lock of silver hair from her face. Just a little more, sweet one, she whispered. Then we'll eat. Zellari held 7 small credit chips tightly in her hand. It was all she had left. She had planned carefully 1 loaf of bread, 1 pouch of soup. Enough for 1 dinner and maybe something left for the next day. When it was finally their turn, the cashier, a large insectoid alien, looked up from the scanner with flat eyes. He scanned the items and said in a dry voice, 9 credits. Zellari blinked, confused. 9? She asked, but it was 7 yesterday. Price changed, the cashier replied. Not looking at her again, do you have 9 or not? Her throat tightened. No, she said softly. I only have 7. Behind her, people in the line started murmuring. A few grumbled, shifting their feet in the cold. Zellari's hands shook as she looked down at the food, bread and soup, warm and soft. She slowly reached forward and placed the soup pouch on the counter. We'll just take the bread then, she said quietly. No, Mommy. Mina said suddenly, her voice weak but desperate, her big eyes filled with tears. I want soup. Zellari couldn't speak. She looked at her daughter, saw her tiny lips turning blue. She wanted to scream, to break something, to run away. But all she could do was lower her head, ashamed. The cashier was about to remove the food when a voice came from behind. I'll pay. Zellari turned quickly, surprised. Standing behind her was a human man, maybe in his 30s. He wore an old work uniform, dark gray with oil stains. On his chest was a badge that read Janitorial Services. Jacob, he looked tired, his eyes sunken, but there was something kind in his face. Without waiting for her answer, he stepped forward and placed his payment chip on the scanner. The machine beeped, and the screen showed paid. Zellari's mouth opened, then closed again. She didn't know what to say. Why would you do that? She asked softly. Jacob shrugged. No one should go hungry, he said, then looked down at Mina. Especially not kids. Mina smiled shyly and said, Thank you, mister. Her voice was small, but real. And Jacob smiled just a little. Zellari tried to hand him back the bread, but he raised his hand. Keep it, he said. It's yours now. He turned and stepped away from the line. Walking back into the stormy night like nothing had happened, Zellari stood frozen, holding the warm bag of food in her arms. People behind her were moving again, but her heart was still. She looked at Mina, who held onto her hand tightly. The girl looked happier now, her cheeks less pale. That one moment, one small act of kindness, had changed everything. They walked home through the snow-covered path slowly. Zellari kept thinking about the man. The human, a janitor, someone most people ignored. Yet he had noticed her pain and acted without hesitation. That night, Zellari heated the soup carefully and shared it with Mina. The little girl smiled after every bite, her body finally warming. Zellari ate too, but her thoughts were far away. She didn't know the man's full name, where he lived, or what made him help. But she knew something had happened today. Something rare in a hard-world kindness. In a place where people looked past each other, where survival made hearts cold, one human had chosen compassion. And that had lit a small light in the dark, one she would not forget. The next morning. The sky above the colony was still gray. The cold winds had not stopped, and neither had the hunger. Zellari sat on the edge of her bed, holding her daughter's small hand. Mina was still asleep, her tiny fingers wrapped around a scrap of blanket. She looked peaceful now, her cheeks warmer after the soup. Zellari, however, couldn't sleep last night. Her mind kept going back to the man, the human, the janitor. Jacob, why had he helped her? Why did someone with so little give something so big? She wasn't used to kindness. Most people looked away when they saw someone struggling. Some even mocked her, called her a burden, a widow from the lower zones, just another single mother. With no credit and no power, but Jacob hadn't looked away. He had stepped forward when no one else did. That afternoon, Zellari made a quiet decision. She bundled Mina in her warmest scarf, held her hand, and walked to the station complex. She didn't know where Jacob worked exactly, but the badge had said janitorial services, so she followed the lower hallways. Past the boiler rooms and dusty service tunnels, she asked a food vendor, then a security droid. And finally, near the recycling chamber, she found him. Jacob was kneeling beside a broken water pipe. His sleeves were rolled up, arms covered in grime. His face was sweaty despite the cold. He didn't see her at first. Zellari stood there silently for a moment, unsure what to say. Then Mina tugged her hand and whispered, "It's him, Mommy." Jacob turned at the sound, surprised. He wiped his hands on a dirty cloth and stood up. "Oh," he said, "hey, it's you too." Zellari gave a nervous smile. "I came to thank you," she said, holding out a small parcel wrapped in cloth. "It's nothing big, just some dried root cakes." Jacob looked at the parcel, then at her face. "You didn't need to do that," he said gently. "Really? I know," she replied, "but I wanted to." There was an awkward silence for a moment. Mina broke it with a giggle when she saw a cleaning drone bump into a wall. Jacob chuckled too, and finally relaxed. "I'm on break in 10 minutes, he said. "Want to sit and talk for a bit?" Zellari hesitated, then nodded. They found a bench outside the maintenance hall. Cold but quiet, Jacob brought 2 cups of warm nutrient tea from a nearby dispenser. He gave one to Zellari and offered a third small cup to Mina, the little girl. Smiled and drank it happily. Zellari looked at Jacob carefully. His face was rough, with small scars across his jawline. His eyes had a tired sadness, but also kindness. "What made you help us?" she asked finally. Jacob stared into his cup for a moment. "Because I've been where you are," he said. "Maybe not on this planet, but somewhere." He paused, then added, "Back on Earth, I lost my family during the oxygen wars. I had nothing. I know what it feels like when no one sees you." Zellari's hand tightened around her cup. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded. "You don't have to be. It's life," he continued. "But when you see someone else going through it, and you can help, even a little, you do, for the first time in months." Zellari felt something break in her chest, not from pain, but from understanding she wasn't alone. Someone else had suffered too, and still chose to be kind. They sat in silence for a while. Mina had fallen asleep on the bench, her head resting in her mother's lap. "You live in the worker blocks?" Zellari asked. "Yeah, Building C, 2nd floor," Jacob replied. "Tiny room, broken heater. But it's mine," she smiled. "I live in the old storage huts near the boundary fence," she said. "No heat at night." Jacob looked concerned. "Winter's going to get worse," he said. "That's not safe for her." "I know," Zellari said. "But we can't afford better." She didn't expect a reply. She wasn't asking for help. But Jacob nodded slowly and said, "If things get too bad, you can knock on my door. Anytime. I don't have much, but we'll figure something out." Zellari didn't reply right away. Her throat felt tight. No one had ever said something like that to her before. She looked at him, eyes shining. "Thank you," she said. Voice soft but full of meaning. That night, Zellary walked back to her cold little hut. But the world didn't feel as cold anymore, not because the wind had stopped, but because someone had made her feel seen. Someone had opened a door, and sometimes, one door is enough to change a life. The next few days passed slowly. The cold winds never stopped, and food remained hard to find, but something inside Zellary had changed. She still had no money, no warm clothes, and no proper home, but she didn't feel invisible anymore. Each evening, after cleaning supplies were put away and the machines were shut off, Jacob would find a quiet place to sit. Sometimes it was the bench near the heaters, sometimes a corner near the storage wall, and each time Zellary and Mina would join him. No one told them to leave, maybe because no one noticed them, or maybe because someone did and chose not to say anything. Jacob brought extra food packets when he could. Zellary tried not to take them, but he always smiled and said, "Don't waste it, it'll just go bad." One evening, as snow drifted past the small glass window near the back hallway, they sat again, quiet but comfortable. Mina played with an old service droid ball Jacob had found in the trash and fixed. It blinked and bounced, making her laugh softly. "You were a soldier?" Zellary asked, breaking the silence. Jacob nodded. "Earth's Defense Forces. 2 tours during the Oxygen Wars," he said. "I was 23 when I got sent out. By the time I came back, the world I knew was gone." Zellary looked at him closely. His eyes were focused, but distant. "What happened to your family?" she asked carefully. He sighed. "They lived near the coast, a place called New Monroe. When the seawalls broke, they had 10 minutes. No one warned them." Zellary's heart ached. She didn't say sorry this time. Some pains are too big for soft words. She waited, gave him space. He continued. "I tried going back, but the air was bad. The land poisoned. There was no home left, so I signed up for a relocation work visa. Ended up here." Zellary lowered her gaze. "My husband was a miner," she said. "He worked deep in the salt tunnels. Last cycle, a support beam collapsed. They found him 2 days later." Jacob didn't speak. He just looked at her and nodded. "That was enough. I used to be a language teacher," she said softly. "Before Mina was born, I taught the younger ones how to speak, how to write. But after the accident, I had to quit." "You're still teaching," Jacob said, glancing at Mina, who was humming to herself while spinning the ball. Zellary smiled for the first time that evening. "She's smart," she said proudly. "She picks up words quickly, even some Earth's dialects." She said thank you in Hindi once. Jacob chuckled. Zellary laughed too. Covering her mouth with her hand, the sound surprised her. It had been so long since she laughed freely. Jacob leaned back against the cold wall and looked up. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. "Every day," she replied. "But with what?" "I have no money, no travel permit, no relatives off-world." "Same," Jacob said, "but still. It's nice to dream sometimes." They sat in silence again, but this silence wasn't awkward. It was soft, like a blanket that wrapped around their pain and made it easier to carry. Zellary looked at Jacob again. In the beginning, he had been a stranger, just a man in a line. But now, she saw more. Not just a human, but a heart damaged, but still open. Still willing to help someone like her. "I never thanked you properly," she said, her voice gentle. "You don't have to," he replied quickly. "I know I don't," she said, "but I want to." He smiled, not wide, but honest. "You're welcome, Zellary," he said, then added, "and if you ever need more than food, if you ever just need to talk, I'll be around." Zellary felt something stir inside her chest again. Hope, not loud or strong, but quiet, like a single spark in the cold. Mina suddenly walked over and sat beside them. "I like this place," she said, with a sleepy smile. "It's warm here." Jacob looked at her, then at Zellari. "Maybe we can make it warmer," he said softly. That night, they walked home slower, even though it was colder. Zellari didn't feel like she was walking through darkness anymore. She felt like someone was walking beside her even when she was alone. And in a colony built on struggle and silence, a shared story had started to grow. Quietly, gently, like a small seed under snow. The snow had grown heavier each morning. The sky looked darker than before. The air outside burned the lungs. Even the metal walls of the colony felt frozen. Zellari did her best to keep Mina warm. She wrapped her in every cloth they owned. She shared her food, skipped her own meals, and kept her body around the child every night. But it wasn't enough. One morning, Mina wouldn't wake up easily. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale and cold. Her lips had lost their color. She didn't cry, didn't move, just whispered, "I'm tired, Mommy." Panic gripped Zellari's chest. She picked her up quickly and wrapped her in her shawl. Then she ran through the snow-covered paths, straight toward the colony's nearest clinic. The glass doors opened slowly as she stepped in. A tall, four-armed nurse looked at her with a bored expression. "My daughter," Zellari gasped. "She's not well. Please help her." The nurse took one look, scanned Mina with a handheld device, and said, "She has lung frost, early stage. She needs heat treatment and a strong-dose med patch." Zellari's heart pounded. "Yes, anything. Please, give it to her." The nurse turned the screen around. "Total cost is 142 credits. Zellari froze. Her arms tightened around Mina. I don't have that," she said quietly. "No credits, no treatment." The nurse replied without emotion. "You can try the low-zone emergency clinic if you're fast, but that's on the other side of the colony." Zellari cried, "She can't wait that long." The nurse turned away, next in line. Zellari stumbled backward, holding her child close. She stepped into the snow again, tears freezing on her cheeks. She had no one to ask, no money, and no time. And then, through the thick snowfall, she saw him, Jacob, pushing a cleaning unit near the station fuel chamber. He looked up, and when he saw her, he dropped the controls and ran. "What happened?" he asked, already taking off his outer jacket. Zellari couldn't speak at first. She just shook her head and showed him Mina's face. Jacob looked at the girl, then at the clinic door behind them. They didn't help. He asked as Zellari nodded. Once eyes filled with pain, Jacob didn't wait. "Come with me," he said. Turning fast, he led her through a side path behind the station, toward the worker quarters, Building C, second floor, room 12. It was small, barely enough for one person. There was only one chair, one bed, and a floor heater with a flickering light. But it was warmer than anything Zellari had felt in days. Jacob grabbed a box from under his bed, opened it, and pulled out a sealed med patch. He checked the expiration date, tore the wrap, and gently pressed it on Mina's chest. Then he adjusted the heater and brought extra blankets from a storage bin. "Lay her on the bed. Keep her flat," he said, his voice calm but shaking slightly. Zellari followed every word. Within minutes, Mina's breathing began to steady. Her cheeks got a little color again. She was still weak, but her body started responding. Zellari sat on the floor beside the bed, clutching Mina's hand. Tears streamed down her face. "You saved her," she whispered. "You saved her life." Jacob sat down beside her, exhausted. "I just did what anyone should do," he said, but his eyes showed something deeper: fear, risk, and guilt. "Where did you get the med patch?" Zellari asked. Jacob looked away. "I took it from the supply closet," he admitted. "It was supposed to be for emergency worker injuries." Zellari looked shocked. "They'll fire you for that," she said. "Maybe," he replied. But I'd rather lose a job than let a child die. The room went quiet. Mina slept peacefully now, wrapped in warmth and love. Outside, the wind howled. Zellery looked at Jacob again. This man had given more than food. He had given safety. He had risked everything for her and her child. She couldn't understand why, but in her heart, something had changed forever. She stood up and sat on the edge of the bed, brushing Mina's hair. She hasn't been this warm in weeks, she said quietly. Jacob leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling. She need more heat through the night, he said. She can stay here. I'll sleep on the floor. No, Zellery said quickly. I can't let you do that. But he shook his head. You can and you will, he said, smiling. This place is nothing fancy, but it has warmth. That night, Zellery sat awake beside her daughter while Jacob slept on the floor. She looked around the room-rusted walls, a broken screen, a flickering heater, but for the first time in many nights, she didn't feel afraid. She felt safe, because in this little space, built for one, a stranger had made room for three, and in a world where kindness was rare, one human had chosen to protect someone who didn't even belong to his species. That kind of courage was more powerful than any law, more healing than any medicine. Jacob didn't sleep that night. The floor was cold, his back ached, and the heater buzzed every few minutes, but he didn't care. Every time he opened his eyes, he saw Mina's small chest rising and falling. Slow but steady. That was enough. Zellery sat on the edge of the bed, eyes heavy but alert. Her daughter's fever had dropped. Her skin was no longer ice cold. Still, the danger wasn't over. Without continued warmth and another med patch, she might get worse again. Jacob sat up slowly, rubbing his neck. You need more supplies, he said quietly. Zellery looked at him, worried. I can't ask for more. She whispered, You've already done too much. Jacob stood and pulled on his worn boots. I'll be back in 10 minutes, he said. Stay here. Keep the heater close to her face, and don't let the blankets shift. Where are you going? She asked, standing up, but Jacob was already moving toward the door. Just trust me, he said without turning back. He slipped into the maintenance corridor, keeping his head low. The supply room was 3 floors below, locked behind a biometric scanner, but Jacob had cleaned that room so many times. He knew all the tricks. He reached the metal door and pulled out his old maintenance card. It wasn't supposed to work anymore, but the scanner still beeped. He was in. Inside the cold storage cabinet were med patches, emergency rations, and small, portable heaters. He grabbed one of each and stuffed them into a cleaning sack. Then, he paused, hearing footsteps. 2 security bots passed by the door, but didn't stop. Still, his heart beat hard in his chest. One wrong move, one alert, and he'd be off the station by morning. He returned to his room fast, breathing heavily. Zellery opened the door before he even knocked, her eyes wide. You took more, she said in a half-whisper. Jacob nodded. She needs it, he replied simply. He activated the portable heater and placed it near Mina's legs. The warmth spread quickly, and the girl's breathing grew even steadier. Zellery sat down, her hands shaking. You'll be fired, she said. You might be arrested. I know, Jacob said. But I couldn't just watch her suffer. The silence between them was heavy, not angry, not awkward, just full of fear, and something deeper I'm not used to. This, Zellery said suddenly, this kind of care. No one has ever risked anything for me before. Not since my husband. Jacob looked at her. You're worth risking for, he said quietly. You and your daughter. Zellery turned her face away, trying to hide the tears in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. Jacob reached out and gently touched her shoulder. You already did, he said, just by staying strong. The next morning, Jacob went to work like nothing had happened. He mopped the same hallways, scrubbed the same toilets. But something had changed. He checked his back every 5 minutes, wondering if someone had noticed the missing supplies. By midday, a message appeared on his handheld. "Supervisor wants to see you. Room 7B. Jacob's heart dropped. He looked up, and across the hallway, Zelari was watching him from the shadows. She saw the message on his screen, her eyes filled with fear. He gave her a small nod. "It'll be okay," he mouthed, then turned and walked away. Room 7B was near the station's control wing. Only important staff used that level. Jacob had never even cleaned there. The door opened with a soft chime. Inside, the supervisor sat at a desk, a tall alien with steel blue skin and 4 glowing eyes. He stared at Jacob without speaking for a moment. Then he picked up a report from the table. 2 med patches, the supervisor said. 1 portable heater and an emergency food pack. All missing, all accessed with your override card. Jacob said nothing. He stood straight, waiting for the punishment. "I used him," he said finally. "On a sick child in my quarters, she would have died." The supervisor looked at him silently. The air in the room was thick. Then, after a long pause, the supervisor placed the report down. "You're a fool," he said, "but a brave one, Jacob." Blinked, unsure what that meant. The supervisor stood up and walked around the desk. He lowered his voice. "I know about the woman and the child. This colony was built on silence. But silence can kill." Jacob tensed, waiting. "I won't report this," the supervisor said, "but don't do it again. Next time, I won't protect you." Jacob nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said. "I understand." As he walked out of the office, he felt like he was floating. Not from relief, but from the weight that had been lifted when he returned to his quarters. Zelari was waiting. He stepped inside and closed the door quietly. "Well?" she asked, voice trembling. "I still have a job," he said. Smiling for the first time that day, Zelari didn't speak. She just stepped forward and hugged him tightly. Jacob stood frozen, then slowly put his arms around her. In that small room with a sick child and flickering lights, 2 lives had begun to connect, not out of romance or duty, but out of survival, out of kindness. And 1 emergency decision had brought them closer than either expected. Asterisk, the snow outside hadn't stopped in 3 days. It was thick now, covering the colony roads like a heavy blanket. Most people stayed indoors. Heaters ran all day, and even the droids moved slower. Inside Jacob's tiny room, it was warm and quiet. The portable heater hummed softly, and the smell of reheated broth filled the air. Mina sat on a folded blanket, drawing circles with her finger on the window fog. She looked stronger now, her cheeks full of color, her eyes bright again. Zelari was in the corner, folding a few pieces of clothing. She had washed everything using Jacob's soap ration. It wasn't much, but the room smelled cleaner. Felt more like home. Jacob sat near the heater, cleaning a broken tool he had found it during his shift and said he might fix it. The quiet between them wasn't empty anymore. It was the kind of silence that felt safe, like family, but that peace didn't last long. Just before noon, a heavy knock echoed through the hallway. Jacob froze. Zelari looked up, her hands trembling slightly. Even Mina stopped drawing. Turning her head toward the door, another knock came, firmer this time. Jacob stood up and slowly walked over. When he opened it, his heart dropped. It was the supervisor, tall, stern, dressed in a clean black coat that most workers had never seen. Up close, 2 silent station guards stood behind him, though their weapons were not raised. "May I come in?" the supervisor asked, his voice calm to calm. Jacob hesitated, then stepped aside. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. The supervisor entered, his glowing eyes scanning the room. He saw the heater, the blankets, the soup pot, and then he saw Mina. The little girl stared up at him, eyes wide but not afraid. She clutched a small cloth doll Jacob had made for her from scraps. Zelari stood between the supervisor and Mina quickly, her body tense. "She's recovering," she said firmly. "We're not causing trouble." The supervisor didn't respond. He looked at Jacob. "You used your card to take supplies from the emergency locker." Jacob nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, I did." "You brought unauthorized civilians into restricted worker housing." "Yes, sir," Jacob repeated. "You disobeyed station policy." "Put yourself and this sector at risk." "Yes, sir." The supervisor stepped closer. Zelari clenched her fists. Jacob looked straight ahead, ready for the worst. But then, something strange happened. The supervisor's eyes softened just a little. He turned back toward Mina, who had now stood up beside her mother, holding her hand. "She doesn't look like a risk to me," the supervisor said, almost to himself. Then, he let out a slow breath and faced Jacob again. "You're lucky," he said. "This could have gone differently, I know," Jacob replied. "You could have been removed, exiled, even charged." Jacob nodded again. "I'd do it again if it meant saving her life." He said quietly. The room was silent. Even the heater seemed to hum softer. The supervisor walked around the room once, then stopped near the window where Mina had been drawing. He looked down at the fog-covered glass, then turned and walked back to the door. He paused before leaving and said, "There will be no report. But keep the girl indoors until the weather passes. And don't use your override card again unless someone is bleeding." Jacob's breath caught in his chest. "Thank you, sir," he said. The supervisor looked at Zelari, then at Mina. His expression remained unreadable, but his voice was softer when he said, "Take care of her. This station could use more hearts like hers." Then he walked out, the door sliding shut behind him. The silence after he left was thick. Jacob leaned against the wall and exhaled deeply. Zelari sat down on the bed, holding Mina close. "He knew," she said. "He knew everything." Jacob nodded. "Maybe someone saw us. Maybe he's been watching." "Why didn't he punish you?" Zelari asked, still shaking. "I don't know." Jacob said, "Maybe he remembered what it's like to care." Mina smiled and climbed into Jacob's lap. "You're not in trouble, right?" she asked, yawning. Jacob smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Not today," he said. "We're okay today." That night, the wind outside screamed against the walls, but inside that small room, there was light, warmth, and laughter. The danger had passed, for now, but the bond between the three of them had grown even stronger. In the middle of a cold, uncaring station, kindness had taken root. And the man who swept floors had protected something more valuable than supplies. He had protected life, and someone, somewhere, had seen it and chosen to let it grow. The storm ended 3 days later. The sun peeked through thick gray clouds for the first time in weeks. Snow melted slowly, dripping from the rooftops. The streets of the colony came back to life, but inside Jacob's small room, something had already changed. Not just the temperature, not just the mood, something deeper. Something warm had taken root. Zelari was no longer a guest. She helped clean the small space, repaired a crack in the wall, and even arranged Jacob's tools in neat rows. Mina laughed more now. Her cough was gone, her cheeks full, and she chased the old service droid like it was a living pet. The room that was built for one had become home to three. And yet, it didn't feel crowded. It felt complete. Jacob returned from his shift one evening to find something strange. The door was open, and soft music played inside. Zelari had somehow fixed the old speaker on the wall. A gentle melody floated through the room like wind through leaves. She turned when he entered and smiled. "Mina's asleep," she whispered. I made soup. Jacob placed his toolkit down and sat near the heater. He accepted the warm bowl with quiet thanks. After a few sips, he looked around and said, "This place doesn't feel like a storage box anymore." Zalari laughed softly. "That's because it's not." She said, "It's something else now." Jacob looked at her, and for a moment, the silence between them felt charged, not with fear or pain, but with understanding. Something unspoken passed between them. Later that night, as Mina slept with her doll in her arms, Jacob and Zalari sat on the floor, drinking leftover tea. The heater flickered slightly, casting soft shadows on the wall. "I used to think I'd die on this station," Jacob said suddenly. "No family, no friends, just work until my body gave out. I didn't even care," he added. "I stopped dreaming." Zalari nodded slowly. "I felt that too," she said, "after my husband. I thought it was over. Just survive for Mina. Forget hope, forget joy. But now?" he asked quietly. Zalari looked toward Mina's sleeping form. "Now I don't feel alone," she said, "and that changes everything." Jacob placed his empty cup down and leaned his head back against the wall. "I don't have much," he said. "No savings, no rank, just this room, this job, but you gave us everything." Zalari said, "You gave us life." The next day, something unexpected happened. When Jacob went to work, he found a food packet sitting beside his mop bucket, no name, just a note. For the girl. "Keep going." The day after that, a mechanic handed him an old coat, too small for me now. The man said, "Might fit your little one." Within a week, other workers quietly joined in. A clean blanket appeared on their doorstep, a new heating coil was left in the hallway. Even a pair of small boots showed up in a sealed bag. No one said anything directly, but word had spread. Not about rules being broken, but about a human janitor who saved an alien child, and about a mother who didn't give up. Even when everything was gone, people were tired of silence, tired of pretending not to see suffering. And one act of kindness had reminded them what it meant to care. Zalari used some scraps and turned them into a small learning board for Mina. She taught her new words, new numbers. Jacob would come home and find drawings taped to the wall. Sometimes he pretended not to understand, just so Mina could explain it to him. One morning, a message arrived on Jacob's work terminal. It was from the supervisor. "Station is opening a learning center for children of workers. We'll need someone who understands language instruction. If you know anyone, send them to my office." Jacob smiled. He looked across the room where Zalari was brushing Mina's hair. He didn't say anything right away, but the look in his eyes said everything. A few days later, Zalari stood in front of the supervisor, nervous but proud. He handed her a small badge that said Instructor, Youth Division, and for the first time in a long time, she had a job again, not just a way to survive, but a reason to grow. Mina walked to school with other children, her scarf flapping in the wind. Jacob watched her from the corridor window. She turned and waved before disappearing around the corner. He waved back with a smile that reached his eyes. Life wasn't perfect. The station was still cold, still crowded, but now it had warmth. Not from machines, but from people. And all of it had started with one moment at the counter. A mother breaking down, a child hungry, and a human janitor who couldn't walk away from that single act of kindness. A family had formed, a story had been written, and a new life had begun.